What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Tuesday, January 21st edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 5-game NBA slate tonight looks pretty ugly. One game of the 5 has a spread in the single digits, and it involves the Orlando Magic, which means a slow defensive game. Game has like a 212 total, give or take. So really interesting slate. I think that there are some different ways to approach it. One thing to keep in mind is, spreads, obviously bigger spreads are more likely to become blowouts, but it certainly doesn't guarantee anything. And it doesn't guarantee that the 1 point spread is a close game either. We've seen plenty of games all season long where they have close spreads. They end up being 30-point blowouts. They have 15-point spreads. They end up going down to the wire relatively. So obviously, spread is just one piece of information, but none of these games are likely to be very good basketball games. Orlando, Toronto, likely to be the most competitive, but we'll see. But going to go through looking at how I'd approach the slate if it started right now on DraftKings. As I always do, I'm going to use my player exposures to talk about each side of the game, kind of take player exposures at this point with a grain of salt. Obviously, things are going to change between now and lock when it comes to ownership, injury news that we're still waiting on, all that type of stuff. But I'm going to just talk strategy and go through. Feel free to throw questions in chat as you have them. And if I have an answer, I will give it. But going to start off here with Orlando taking on Toronto. We do have Q tags for the Magic. Cole Anthony is questionable. That one obviously matters quite a bit with Jalen Suggs out. He has been starting. Jet Houston is questionable. He hasn't been playing over the last few games. Gary Harris was listed as questionable. He's still listed as questionable, but he said he's probably not going to play. Jonathan Isaac is questionable. Him and Anthony both were added to the injury report earlier today with illnesses, so we'll see. No Franz Wagner, no Mo Wagner, no Jalen Suggs, so no Goga. So the team is already relatively shorthanded. It's been this way for a while, but if you start removing other guys, then obviously it's going to get worse. If Cole Anthony ends up not playing, you should expect even more playing time for Anthony Black, who's already been playing a lot. Trevelin Queen could see his minutes ramp up. So we'll have to, keep an eye on that. If Jonathan Isaac is out, then you probably see a bit more playing time for Tristan da Silva, also for Caleb Houston. So there are moving parts here, but for now I have the questionable guys projected in. There is ownership coming into Wendell Carter at 25 to 30%. Ownership coming into Cole Anthony in that same range, 15 to 20% ownership on Anthony Black and Paolo Banchero, and then KCP coming in at about between 20 and 25% as well. And those are the 5 guys that I'm getting a lot of. Also, Wendell Carter Jr. played about 34 minutes in his last game. You don't have Goga, you don't have Wagner. You have Isaac, who is questionable. You really don't have a true backup here for Wendell Carter Jr. And I've mentioned it on shows before, but those spots are really nice to attack because it means that if Wendell Carter is playing well, he doesn't have anybody to take minutes away from him. This becomes even more true if Jonathan Isaac does miss this game. You still have Banchero on some sort of minutes limit, I would assume. So it becomes a situation, especially if Isaac is out, where Carter should really just play as many minutes as he can handle in a nice pace-up spot against a Toronto defense that is really bad. So yeah, Carter looks really good to me here. Still 5,900, good price tag on him. Cole Anthony, if he starts, 6,500, still reasonable. Playing time for him is relatively volatile. Have him projected for, I believe, about 29 minutes. He has the potential to play mid-30s if he's playing well, but you do also run the risk of Anthony Black closing over him. There's nothing stopping Orlando from going with a closing lineup of Black, Caldwell Pope, Da Silva, Isaac Carter or Banchero Carter. So he's not guaranteed to close, but still at 6,500 and on an offense where his offense is still needed. You don't have Franz Wagner still. Obviously, you do have Banchero back. Anthony at 6,500 does still look pretty good here. Anthony Black, 4,400 coming off the bench, but pretty likely to find his way into the closing lineup. There is risk. I mean, you could get a closing lineup that has Cole Anthony, like the starting lineup, Anthony, KCP, Da Silva, Banchero, Carter. That can happen. And if it does, you're probably getting like 23 or 24 minutes from Black. But it's pretty likely that he closes over one of Cole Anthony or Tristan da Silva. I projected him for 26 to 27 minutes. Forgot to upload my minutes projections in here. But if you want them, you can get them using the link in the description below for my NBA projections. Those are publicly available now through Dub Club. Comes with a 7-day free trial. So I forgot to load them up for the show, but they are available if you want them. Yes, Conscious Anthony is questionable. That's since like 11 this morning or something like that. Paolo Banchero, I think, is interesting at 8,600. The price tag is relatively expensive for somebody that has been on a minutes limit since coming back from his injury. But one thing I think is interesting, and I wanted to point out with him, is obviously you have all the opportunity for production in the world when he's playing without Franz Wagner. The only real issue has been his playing time. But not only are you getting the favorable matchup here against Toronto, you actually have also, I think, a situation where his minutes limit might be a little bit less restrictive than it seems at first glance. If you look just at his playing time, 27, 27, 26, 29, 29. So you can see it kind of ramping up slowly. And I don't expect that he just suddenly plays 38 minutes or anything. But what stood out for me from Orlando's most recent game is that Banchero finished that game, and this was the game against Denver 2 nights ago. Banchero finishes this game with 29.3 minutes played, which looks directly in line with basically what he had been doing in previous games. But he actually subbed out along with Carter and KCP with 2.5 minutes to go in that game. The Magic basically waved the white flag and subbed in, Trevelin Queen, Caleb Houston, Corey Joseph. So the way his rotation actually looked there was, if that game had actually stayed close down the stretch, you might have actually gotten him up to like 32 minutes or so. So I didn't project 32 minutes here, but I did go ahead and go to 30. I do think he potentially has the ability to play 31, 32 minutes here. And you're not getting a ton of ownership into him at 8,600 in a good spot on a 5-game slate where opportunity cost just isn't going to be as high as obviously it would be on larger slates. You don't have a ton of great pay up options here on this slate. You have Jokic, you have LeBron and Davis in the Lakers game, but you're missing Embiid. You don't have Giannis on the slate. You don't have Cunningham. You don't have Trae Young. You don't have a lot of the options that you normally would want to pay up for. And Banchero so far this season, 211 minutes played without Franz Wagner on the floor, 1.42 DraftKings points per minute. He has a 40.2% usage rate in those minutes, so the upside is very high if you get those minutes. So I do like that I'm getting a little bit over the field on Banchero. KCP at 4K, it's KCP. There's nothing exciting here. But one thing I would mention with him too is that, I have him in for around 30 minutes. His playing time, if you're just using averages from recent games or anything like that, is going to be a little bit misleading because he had the game where I think he got hurt after like 11 minutes or something like that. That is kind of pulling his averages down. He played 34 minutes last game, give or take. He has the potential to play that if this is a competitive game that goes down to the wire and he is in the closing lineup. So, like I said, I projected 30 as his, median, but he does have the potential to play more. He is only 4K. I'm fine getting to around 20% of him. Isaac, De Silva, Queen, all showing up a little bit. Nothing that I'm confident in here. It's kind of just a 5-game slate, throwing random pieces into lineups. Isaac, like I said, is questionable. If he's out, the minutes projection will increase a little bit on De Silva and on Caleb Houston. We saw Trevelin Queen get like 24 minutes last game, including garbage time run. Would have played about 21 and a half. Had he not gotten garbage time run, I have him in for 21-ish here. It's just a spot where he's $3,700. He's low owned. He's landing in a lineup here or there. Certainly not anybody that I'd be upset if I have 0 of, but these main 5 pieces are the ones that really stand out for Orlando. And again, if Anthony is out, then you're looking at more minutes for Black, probably more minutes for Queen. Corey Joseph most likely enters the rotation at that point too. And Jet Howard also, is questionable. So there are some moving parts here for Orlando. On the other side for Toronto, no Emmanuel Quickly, no Q tags here. Chris Boucher is questionable. None of the other pieces are questionable. Quickly is out. Agbaji is out. If Boucher were to miss, you probably are just redistributing minutes to Jonathan Mogbo and Jamison Battle. I don't think Boucher has a big impact if he's out. If he is in, he's 3,500, probably playing somewhere from 15 to 20 minutes. Good point per minute guy, shitty matchup. If he falls into some lineups, that's fine, but nothing I'd be prioritizing. One spot that I do think is really interesting here, though, is Jakob Poeltl. at 6,200. Again, this is overall a pretty unappealing spot going up against an Orlando team that is very good defensively. But Pirtle's playing time, I think, is pretty appealing. His last couple of games, it has come down a little bit. It is a little bit concerning that in their last or 2 games ago, it was a competitive game. He still only played about 31 minutes. Last game, he was in foul trouble, only played 22. I'm not really taking anything away from that game. You go back 3 games ago, though, 35 minutes, 34 4 games ago, 34 5 games ago. I'm not just because he played like 31 minutes in their last competitive game, I'm not just scrapping everything that we've known about this Toronto rotation all season long and saying that that's what he does now. I have him in for 33 minutes. I've seen across the industry other sites at like 30, 31. I think that 30 or 31 is certainly a possible outcome. I think it's too low for his median just based on everything that we've seen this season. 31.8 minutes per game is his average overall for the year, 31 and a half over his last 10. I'm at, like I said, 32 to 33, and I'm pretty comfortable with that. And it's just making me get basically 2x the field on Pirtle here. Still a good point per minute guy. You are still missing quickly as well. So from just a obviously different position, but general rotational standpoint, there are minutes available. You have Davion Mitchell starting, playing 28, 29 minutes if he avoids foul trouble. You have Shed playing basically the non-Davion Mitchell minutes. So it's not a direct one-to-one that impacts Pirtle. But when you have Quickly in, then you start getting guys that, you can play different positions. You can run different lineups out there. And maybe eventually you do start seeing him lose some minutes. But right now I expect the center rotation to basically be 48 minutes combined between Pirtle and Kelly Olynyk. Maybe you get a minute or two to Boucher. But basically I expect it to be Pirtle with Olynyk as the direct backup and mostly nobody else getting those minutes. So unless suddenly Kelly Olynyk is just a consistent 17, 18 minute per game guy now, which I don't know why that would be the case, those minutes should still be there for Pirtle. So I am interested in him. John C said, what about Kelly O? I assume that's in response to Chris Boucher's minutes. Olynyk could benefit if Boucher is out, but the reason that I would hesitate to give him too much of a bump is that for the most part, he's just been backing up Jakob Pirtle, and then Boucher's been playing alongside him. So I think it's most likely that if Boucher is out, they just take that opportunity to get more minutes from Mogbo and Battle than give Olynyk minutes at two positions, but it is certainly possible. Like you said, Olynyk can space the floor. He certainly can play those minutes alongside Pirtle. We just haven't really seen too much of it yet. So I think it's more likely that they go to those other guys, especially since they have the G League guys up. If the G League guys were not available, then I would think it's more likely that you got more Kelly Olynyk minutes, but I assume that they just use it as an opportunity to get more minutes for those guys. You also have Bruce Brown that is in the rotation playing around 20 minutes now that maybe steps into an extra minute or two if Boucher is out. So there are different ways they could go, and it could be Kelly O. I just don't think that's the most likely case if Boucher misses. Scotty Barnes looks good here at 8,500. This is somebody that I've mentioned it before, but he plays huge minutes when Toronto's actually in a competitive game, which of course isn't very often, but this game is as likely as any to be competitive. So getting him at 8,500 looks pretty good. Point guard, small forward eligible, getting 24% ownership. And again, not a ton of opportunity cost in this price range either. Grady Dick at 4,200, really volatile minutes, which I think is appealing. We've seen plenty of games recently where he only plays like 25 minutes, but at the same time, if he's playing well, there's nothing stopping him from getting to 30 minutes or so. We've seen him play that plenty this year. You don't have Agbaji that has to get minutes now. So when you start thinking about, the other guys on Toronto that are taking minutes away from Grady Dick, it's not guys that are like super necessary for them to get minutes. Jamison Battle, Jonathan Mogbo, Bruce Brown's probably going to get his 20 or so. Walter hasn't been in the rotation anyway. So there is the potential, if he's playing well, for him to just run into more playing time at 4,200 and modest ownership. I do think that is relatively interesting in tournaments. I'm right around the field on RJ Barrett. He just kind of is what he is. No Emmanuel Quickly does mean more of a secondary ball handler role for RJ Barrett, which is nice. Davion Mitchell, 3,700, getting 3% ownership. Absolute dog shit as a point per minute guy, but the playing time's been there, and there's nothing to really suggest that's going away right now. When you look at the games earlier this year that he did start, he was essentially a real starter playing around 30 minutes when, he avoided foul trouble. And you've seen that in these recent starts as well. 27 minutes in a game that He, I think, was in a little bit of foul trouble, 26 minutes in a game that, if I remember correctly, he fouled out. 30 minutes last game. I have him in for 29 minutes here. It's getting me a little bit above the field. Not somebody I want to go crazy on, but he is sub 4K and a starter. He's not like a fake starter that is going to play 3 rotations. He could, but that shouldn't be the expectation. The expectation, based on what we've seen, is that he's likely to be in the closing lineup if he's not in foul trouble. Jamal Shed basically playing the non-Davion Mitchell minutes makes him interesting in large field tournaments to me at 3K. Like, if Davion Mitchell does get in foul trouble, you probably get more playing time for Shed. Agbaji being out matters to me here too. And this does even kind of have a little bit of a trickle-down effect, I think, if Boucher is out, just because you start to thin out the rotation a little bit. And it makes it even more likely that basically Davion Mitchell and Jamal Shed are just like, their minutes are on a string where every minute that Mitchell loses, Shed gains, and vice versa. So I think that there is some volatility in Jamal Shed's minutes for somebody getting 0 ownership at 3K flat. So again, not anything I'm going crazy with, but it's going to be relatively difficult to, find cheap plays that have some semblance of upside at low ownership on a 5-game slate. I do think that Jamal Shed gives you that. Obviously, Chris Boucher gives you that. Bruce Brown gives you that as well. And as I mentioned, if Boucher is out, I do think maybe you see an extra minute or 2 for Bruce Brown. So any of these cheap guys I think are fine, but obviously more excited to be getting to Jakob Poeltl, Scotty Barnes, getting to some Grady Dick, getting to some RJ Barrett. Overall, and obviously not a good matchup for these guys, but there are kind of 2 parts to this. It's not a good matchup as far as Orlando being a good defensive team. It is a good spot, though, where this is a Toronto team where, we know that salaries are in part determined by how many minutes guys play on average. And Toronto's average spread is, I don't know off the top of my head, but something like, 10 points or something like that. Trying to pull it up now. But so far this season, the average spread for the Raptors is like 7.5 points. So getting this at 1.5, even though it's a bad matchup, it does mean that it's a little bit more likely to be competitive, and you're a little bit more likely to get an extra minute or 2 for the main Toronto guys. Moving on to Portland at Miami. For Portland, we have a Q tag on Anthony Simons. He was out last game. Also Q tags on Chris Murray and Robert Williams. So there are some potential impacts here. Simons was out last game. We got Shaedon Sharpe moving to the bench, and the starting lineup was Scoot Henderson, Denny Avdia, Kamara, Grant, and Ayton. If Simons is back, I projected Henderson to start and Avdia to move to the bench, but I don't know what they'll do. I don't know if they go Simons, Avdia. I don't know if they move Sharpe back into the starting lineup. My guess is that they go Henderson and Simons. It seems like they've been happy with the way Henderson's playing lately, and they're happy to get him more minutes. So I projected that for now, but again, this is a 7:30 game. All of this will be answered before lock, but that's how I have it projected right now. Robert Williams, 3K flat, power forward and center eligible, 17% projected ownership. I'm getting to 28% right now. Donovan Clingan is out. So my expectation is that Robert Williams playing time equals 48 minutes minus DeAndre Ayton minutes minus whatever garbage time minutes there are. And so I got him to around like 16 or 17 minutes. He's a good point per minute guy. Power forward eligibility is the key piece here, along with the 3K salary. If he were center only, it's going to be really tough to get to him because you don't want to waste a center spot on a 16-point projection. But the opportunity cost is lower at the forward positions. And like I said, it's just so difficult on a 5-game slate to find 3K guys that have any sort of upside. Robert Williams does give you that. So if he's in, he does look like a pretty decent value play here. If he is out, get to more DeAndre Ayton. I talked about this on a show the other day, and it ended up, I think Williams played, so it didn't matter. We saw it the other day. I don't know if it was Saturday or Sunday. It was a day that I wasn't doing any shows or anything, so I didn't talk about it. But in their last game, DeAndre Ayton just went out there and played 36 minutes because there was no Donovan Clingan and there was no Robert Williams. When you do not have a backup center, your second string or your third string backup center, the starter just plays more typically. You don't usually see the fourth string center, in this case, Duop Reith or Jabari Walker, just step into a full allotment of backup minutes. You usually see whoever it is step up and play a fraction of what the backup center would say. or would play, and then the starter plays more. So I have Ayton in for like 30 or 31 minutes if Williams is in. If Williams is out, I will project Ayton 4 more minutes and get to more of him at $6,400. Jeremy Grant, 5,100. I think this is a really interesting spot in large field tournaments. We haven't seen his playing time ramp up yet since returning from injury, but I would assume that it's going to happen sooner than later. He got to 30 minutes last game, and his salary really is just free falling. So I have him projected for around 31 minutes here, 30 or 31 minutes. But I think that there is the potential, if this game is close, for him to play, several minutes more than that. And so I do think there is upside for him at basically no ownership and as cheap a price tag as basically you're ever going to get on Jeremy Grant. I have him in for, like 30 and a half minutes here. So I do think there is some upside for him. I think he's, just an interesting tournament play. Obviously, there is downside too. This game has a double-digit spread. He could play 25 minutes, but I do think that's interesting. Simons at 6,600, just kind of a tournament flyer. With everybody in, you do see his average playing time drop. Like you have to find minutes now for Henderson, for Simons, for Avdia, for Sharp, for Grant, for Kamara. It becomes pretty difficult. So, his minutes projection ends up coming in around like 31. He's kind of priced for somebody to be out. And so it becomes tough to get there. If he is out, again, it opens up more minutes for Henderson. It opens up minutes for Avdia, who I assume would stay in the starting lineup. Worth noting, he was not limited at all last game. Denny Avdia just came right out and played huge minutes as a starter without Simons last game, played 35.2 minutes. So Scoot Henderson played 38 in that one. Off the bench, Shadon Sharp played 33 and a half. He closed that game over Kamara. So if Simons is out, you do get more playing time, likely for Sharp, for Henderson, for Avdia, potentially for Grant. But again, keep in mind that there is probably some sort of restriction on him still. But Portland is a team that, and it feels weird because they're such a bad team. But as far as coaching tendencies go, they are a team that when they're missing one of their main players, they usually give more minutes to their main guys as opposed to running deeper into their bench. So if you think of it as like Steve Kerr and Golden State being the example of a team that when they're missing Steph Curry, obviously some of the other guys play more minutes, but they also just add a body or two to the rotation. Portland does the opposite, where if they're missing one of their main guys, the other main pieces play more, and they do that instead of just adding one or two bodies to the rotation. So that is something to keep in mind here. If Simons is out, it kind of just pulls up all the other main pieces. Same thing, if Robert Williams is out, going back to the point about DeAndre Ayton's minutes projection should really increase if Robert Williams misses this game. On the other side for Miami, John C. mentioned it, wants to hear my insight on Ware's minutes. I'll preface it by saying that the general insight is I have no idea because it is not something I expected to happen. The second thing I'll say is for now, I projected Highsmith to start and to just have a fake starters role where he starts the first half and he starts the second half and plays like 17 minutes. So if Ware starts this game next to Adebayo, you just really jack up his minutes projection and play a lot of him with power forward eligibility at 4,200. My assumption is that he's coming off the bench, which makes him risky because there's no guarantee that he doesn't just revert right back to his role where he just backs up Bam Adebayo, in which case, like, you would want none. But I do think he's going to get minutes next to Bam. And the reason I think that is, for one, there's minutes available. Miami doesn't have this super deep, good team where it's hard for Spoelstra to experiment and find different rotations that maybe he likes. And we saw that last game against San Antonio, where even before Highsmith's injury and Ware starting the second half, Ware closed the first half next to Bam Adebayo. But the other thing is that Miami was very, very successful in those minutes. Not only did they end up winning the game, but the stretch where Adebayo and Ware closed the first half, Miami was like plus 12. And then Ware starts the second half next to Bam, and Miami is immediately plus 11. So they were really, really successful in those minutes. I assume that they're going to go back to it until at least it doesn't work. So I projected Ware for 22 minutes. I think that's a minute or two below where I've seen some other places that have him, but it's still enough for him to get in like a third of my lineups. So I end up coming in a little bit below where I have his ownership projected right now, but still somebody I'm getting a lot of, and I don't have any problem with it. I do just want to reiterate, though, that there is a lot of volatility here. I think that the rotations we saw last game are very bullish for how they play, how they're likely to use him tonight. But ways that this completely goes to shit are not only he just goes right back to being the backup center and playing behind Bam, in which case you're just fucked. But also, like, you have Nikola Jovic, who in that first half where Ware closed next to Bam, Jovic only played 8 minutes. He wasn't in that closing lineup. If Jovic plays well during his stretch and Ware doesn't, like, Ware at the beginning of the fourth or second quarter just played really well, stayed on the floor. They gave him those minutes next to Bam. If that gets reversed and like Jovic is playing well and Ware is kind of just running wind sprints and not contributing, Jovic can easily get those closing minutes. So there's a lot of ways where Ware's minutes aren't what you want them to be, especially for somebody that is getting close to 50% ownership. Like, there's a lot of volatility here where he, no pun intended, but where he ends up not doing well. So I think that his median projection makes him a good value, but there is a lot of downside in addition to upside here. And that's important to keep in mind when you have somebody getting as much ownership as he is. Duncan Robinson, 4,100. So basically the same price tag, getting a quarter of the ownership, nowhere near as, exciting a play. But he is really cheap, not getting much ownership. He has been in the starting lineup. I projected him for around 24 and a half, 25 minutes. Just getting to him because he's cheap and not getting much ownership. Certainly not any sort of a like flag plant. I think Duncan Robinson is the key to the slate. Anything like that. But just somebody that isn't entirely different from Ware, for example, as far as his range of outcomes goes, when you consider that Ware could play 15 minutes. So just kind of, using him as a pivot in some lineups where I already have a lot of other ownership. But yeah, so Ware, I think good play, just, there is risk. Keep that in mind. Robinson, I think, as far as contrarian plays go, somewhat interesting. Not too much else here that I like. Tyler Hero is questionable at 8,300. If he ends up missing, that should open up more minutes for Terry Rozier at 4,800. It probably gets Alec Burks back into the rotation at 3K flat. I'm assuming Hero is in which case I think he's a perfectly fine play. He just happens to be one that I'm not really getting much of at 8,300. I'm getting, as we saw, I'm getting to Banchero. I'm getting to Scotty Barnes. I assume I'm getting to some other pieces from these later games, but Hero is perfectly fine. Nikola Jovic also I'm not getting to, but would kind of be an interesting tournament play for the same reasons that I was saying, like the negative side to Ware. He's obviously a little bit more expensive at 4,900, but they're not directly negatively correlated. Basically, the way that I think about this rotation is that I think you're probably getting around 96 minutes combined of Highsmith in his fake start, or what I assume is a fake start. That's another way that Ware could just be screwed, by the way, is if Highsmith plays real minutes. But I assume you're basically getting like 96 minutes of Highsmith, Ware, Jovic, Bam, where it's 48 minutes of Bam plus Ware, and then Ware playing some minutes alongside Bam, basically playing whatever is left of the non-Highsmith Jovic minutes. It's kind of how I thought about this. And so while they're not directly negatively correlated, if you do get Jovic playing well, like we assume that Ware if the game is remotely competitive, you assume that Ware isn't closing over Bam, probably. So if Jovic is closing, Ware probably isn't, and you do get some negative correlation between those two. So as you can see, it's not the approach I'd be taking right now, but I do think it's kind of an interesting one where maybe you could just play some more Jovic in your non-Ware lineups, and that would make some sense. Bam at 7,800. If he lands in some lineups, fine, but obviously pretty tough to get to. Nothing else that really looks interesting from Miami. Jimmy Butler at 7,500, did play 33 or so minutes in his return. So I don't think he's like hard capped as far as minutes go. There is obviously just going to be volatility with him because who knows what the hell's going on with him and Miami. But I'm not getting to him. But if he, he's like Bam. If he just kind of gets into a lineup here or there, I think it's fine. If Hero is out, you possibly get a little bit more playing time for Jaquez too at 5,100. I probably still wouldn't really get to him unless he ends up starting. Knicks taking on Brooklyn. Everybody is in for, or at least probable for the Knicks. Towns is probable. after being questionable and playing yesterday. You also have Josh Hart probable. So pretty much status quo with the Knicks. I'm getting to Karl-Anthony Towns here. I actually didn't get to much of him yesterday. He was really popular. I went to some cheaper centers. But today he's only projected for about 8% ownership right now. So I'm getting to about 28%. 9,700 just looks like a pretty good price tag here. I also have him showing up well in my play type data, actually as well as anybody on the slate. Now, keep in mind that is a very small adjustment that I make to my projections. There is still going to be noise there, especially in a case like this where Brooklyn has had 100 different players play minutes for them this season. But he is grading out well for me in play type data. He's not getting ownership. He obviously comes with a high ceiling. He plays for a Tibbs offense. This is a back-to-back, and we have seen Tibbs run a little bit deeper rotations on his back-to-backs at times this year. But even then, it's you're talking about playing 34, 35 minutes instead of like 38. So I still have Towns in for 34 and a half or 35 minutes here. Makes him look good at low ownership. Brunson getting 11% ownership. I'm not getting much at 9K. I think he's perfectly fine. There's no reason that I'm not getting a lot other than simply he didn't show up in a lot of lineups. I think he's fine. Mikal Bridges, 6,200, getting 16% ownership. I didn't get there. Again, there's no real reason. I projected him to play his normal minutes. He just didn't really show up. Hart's not really showing up at 7,900. I really think that all of the Knicks starters are just in the same bucket of like perfectly fine. You know what you're getting. They're basically correctly priced. It just so happens that Towns is the one that I'm basically getting at the expense of like all of the rest, whereas the field is projected to basically just be like 5 to 15% on all of them. So nothing really super interesting to say there, other than I guess, that I do have this as a very good play type matchup for Karl-Anthony Towns. So that does mean that I probably have him projected slightly higher than most other sources, and that's probably why I think he's better than ownership. On the other side for Brooklyn, Ben Simmons is out. D'Angelo Russell is probable. Zaire Williams is also out. So a bit of a guessing game at the starting lineup here because once again, we have a different group of Nets that are going to start. My guess was D'Angelo Russell, Keon Johnson, Cam Johnson, Noah Clowney, and Nick Claxton. I have no idea if that will be right. We will find out before lock, fortunately. The Nets are just kind of what they are. Not only do you have a game with like a 12.5 point spread, but you also just have this Nets rotation where they have a ton of interchangeable pieces. You don't really have consistency as far as substitutions, with the exception of Clowney or Sharp being the backup to Claxton. But even there, it's not like they necessarily play 48 minutes because you can get some Clowney minutes too. Although Zaire Williams being out does make it more likely that Clowney, I think, plays the bulk of his minutes next to one of Claxton or Sharp, as opposed to in addition to them. But kind of, it's just a really annoying team. Like when I do my rotations for them, for most teams, like I have a baseline for starters, I have a baseline for bench guys. And then if they're starters that I don't know are going to close, I'll downgrade them a little bit. And if there's bench guys that are going to close, I'll upgrade them, obviously. For the Nets, it's kind of more of just like downgrade all of the starters and upgrade all of the bench guys because they kind of just throw a bunch of dudes on the court for like 22 to 26 minutes and it doesn't matter who they are. So that's exaggerating a little bit, but that's basically how Brooklyn's rotations work. D'Angelo Russell, 5,800, I do think looks pretty good here. He's getting 31% ownership. I'm getting to 22%. His playing time is obviously volatile, but we did see him move into the starting lineup last game, and there's just nothing keeping him from doing whatever he wants on this team. It is the perfect team for him to be on. They're not competing for anything. He's just running around, getting assists and scoring. He's averaged 1.42 DraftKings points per minute so far in his time with the Nets. So even though the playing time, he's not locked into 30 minutes or anything like that, he is probably playing mid to upper 20s and just chucking and having the ball in his hands a ton at 5,800. So I think he looks good. Nobody else here is getting any ownership. I'm not getting to anything else either. I'm getting a little bit of Daron Sharp, but he's up to 4,600 center only. Noah Clowney has power forward eligibility, but he's up to 5,300. I saw somebody ask about Cam Johnson. The problem on him is that he's 7,300. And so you're not really getting a salary discount. Like you could argue that if Cam Johnson were playing 34 minutes on this version of the Nets, he'd be more than 7,300, which is probably true. But you're not getting like a Jeremy Grant situation where he's suddenly down to like 6K or 5,500. And then you also have this game where they are massive dogs. So there is plenty of blowout risk that you have to account for. So I have him for like 26 or 27 minutes. Could he have a good game? Sure. But it's just not likely enough that he's somebody that's showing up for me. Keon Johnson's still relatively expensive for, his skill set at 5,600. So overall, I think the Nets are probably the least appealing team on the slate, D'Angelo Russell accepted. Before we move on to the final two games, reminder, mentioned it earlier, but you can get access to my projections using the link in the description below. I'll throw that up on the screen, but what you get access to, and this is available if you are an Endgame Syndicate subscriber. I post them in Discord every day. If you just want the projections, you can get them using the Dub Club link, $30 a month, 7-day free trial. And you just get access to a spreadsheet that updates live with as I update my own projections. Trying to find them, but I am not succeeding. So give me a second, but you get access to my projections that update as I update them, timestamped, so you can see when. Yeah, there we go. You can see when I make any changes. Also added this column today that I think will be useful because I know it sucks when you're using other people's projections. You get news at 6:45, 15 minutes before lock, and you're trying to guess by the timestamp whether that's accounted for. So you can see here, there's a column here where it tells you if everything for that team is up to date. You get, my projections, my minutes projections. I don't have time, obviously, to run optimal percentages for an NBA slate, but I did put in a proxy for different target scores, how likely players are to hit those, whether or not I'm projecting them as a starter. Something else I think is useful just because you have later games, for example, Philadelphia, where we're not going to know the starting lineup probably by lock. And if I just tell you how I have Eric Gordon projected, that doesn't necessarily do you any good if you think he's going to start and I don't, or vice versa. So you can see that here. I have a column for live projections that update once games start. Whenever I'm late swapping, that will update with how I am reprojecting players. So all that stuff is available for you. And again, just updates as I update my own stuff. So you can see what I'm doing, what changes are being made, all of that stuff. So recommend checking that out if you are looking for a projection source and, maybe don't want to pay $150 a month or whatever the hell sites charge for that now. Obviously it does not come with a sim or optimizer. So I couldn't sell that if I wanted to. That's obviously not included, but you get access to the projections. And again, if you sign up for Endgame Syndicate, you get access to all of our content over there, and the projections are just added on for you. So recommend checking out one of those. Now, getting back to the slate. Forgot to zoom in on this earlier for you guys, but now that's zoomed in. Dangerous Dave said, are you not concerned about Russell's shooting? I don't even know specifically what you're referring to. I don't look at recent shooting. All I would say from a macro standpoint is I would absolutely expect D'Angelo Russell to be a less efficient shooter on the Nets than on a real team. But that's going to be made up for by shot volume generally. D'Angelo Russell is somebody that, if you give him a massive uptick in usage, he's going to be taking worse shots than he'd be taking when he's playing with LeBron James and Anthony Davis, for example. So you would expect his shooting to get worse. But from a fantasy standpoint, you're not losing any points for missed shots. You're still benefiting or coming out neutral, but probably benefiting from him just taking more of them. So from a macro standpoint, that's my thoughts on that. I don't know what he's done in his last couple games or anything like that. It's just not something I would ever look at. Power said he's out on Brooklyn. They're tanking. They're playing 10 plus players with under 27 minutes. Yeah, that's pretty much what I was saying as far as the way that I project them. But that being said, I have Russell in for 26 and a half to 27 minutes. And he's showing up a little bit below the field, but the price hasn't adjusted. D'Angelo Russell's not priced to be playing 30 plus minutes, at least not yet. Moving on to Philadelphia at Denver. Philadelphia, the biggest question mark on the slate right now, as far as one, who is playing, and two, who is starting once we know who is playing. Andre Drummond is questionable. Paul George is questionable. Yabusele is questionable. Joel Embiid is still out. KJ Martin is still out. Caleb Martin is still out. Tyrese Maxey is not on the injury report. So he, I assume, is playing. Jared McCain, obviously, still out, along with Kyle Lowry as well. So I projected the questionable guys in, and then you also have to guess at the starting lineup. My initial guess at the starting lineup today was Maxey, Oubre, George, Yabusele, and Drummond. I switched to Maxey, Oubre, Gordon, George, and Yabusele. Not really based on anything concrete other than we've seen that starting lineup more recently than the Yabusele Drummond one. We have seen Yabusele start with Drummond too, though. And then also just kind of thinking about Denver, where you have Jokic and basically 4 wings / guards. So I projected Gordon to start. It does matter because Andre Drummond sucked the last time he started, but he did play real minutes. He played like 26 and a half minutes. If Andre Drummond does start at 4,900, he's a very good play. If he comes off the bench, I have him projected for like 20 to 21 minutes, and I still got to 12% of him. So it does matter. If you disagree with me on the starting lineup and you think that if Drummond plays, that he is starting no matter what, you should play a lot of him, and then just make your late swaps as you need to if you're wrong. Because he's going to be a really good play if he starts. So I am getting to him a little bit anyway. I will certainly swap to more of him if he ends up starting. Yabusele, 5,300. If he plays, I think starting one way or the other. I have him in for around 29, 30 minutes. He shows up right around the field at 8%. Paul George is the big one here. No Joel Embiid. We know that he's been very good without Joel Embiid on the floor this year. He's been terrible with Joel Embiid on the floor. But 8,100, shooting guard, small forward, should get a bunch of minutes, barring blowout. Should get a bunch of scoring opportunities. So everything's going to look really good for him if he is able to go. Don't know if he will or not. Have him projected for like 34 and a half minutes. But if this game's competitive, he is most likely playing even more than that. Probably plays 36, 37 if it is competitive. One negative, at least in the last game he played, is that he did not play the bench minutes. Tyrese Maxey did. You always want to check for starters that are going to play the second unit minutes against the Nuggets because the Nuggets second unit is so bad. That is a bump for Tyrese Maxey. He is 9,900 though, so very, very difficult to get to him. As you can see, I'm only getting 4%. He's only projected for 6%. But if you are, looking for a tiebreaker or just like trying to convince yourself to play more Tyrese Maxey, he is likely to be getting minutes against the Nuggets second unit, which is really, really good. I'm getting to a bit of Oubre here, 6,300. One way or the other, he should play a lot of minutes. Obviously, you project him for even more minutes if George is out. If George is out, it opens up more for Ricky Council, for Justin Edwards, who are both cheap. If all the Q guys are in, then no interest in those guys. Eric Gordon, 3,800. If he's starting and you want to throw him in a lineup here or there, fine. It's not like, he's any worse than like Trevelyan Queen or some of the other cheap shit that I've had. But obviously not a good point per minute guy. Even if you take Paul George and Embiid off the floor this year, Eric Gordon has a 16% usage rate, not somebody that you're excited about getting to. So a lot of moving parts here for the Sixers. Some stuff will open up if you get George. Drummond ruled out. John Warner said Yabu tweeted back. So I assume that means he's playing or it means his back really hurts. I don't really know. He is that's not why he was on the injury report, at least. So I assume that he's playing. But yeah, you still have to wait on George and Drummond, even if you make that assumption. On the Denver side, we have a team where we are not waiting on anything. Jamal Murray is probable. Peyton Watson is probable. Nobody else relevant is even on the injury report. So we have a team that, on the one hand, is healthy and pretty much correctly priced. On the other hand, they are in a pretty nice spot here. Obviously blowout risk, but that's kind of table stakes for this slate. They have a 122 team total, which is edging out the Lakers for the highest on the slate. So I'm not jamming in anybody specifically, but I am getting to more of Denver than any team we've talked about in the aggregate. Russell Westbrook leading the way for me at 20%, $6,400 salary. His playing time does take a little bit of a hit now that you have Aaron Gordon back, but still likely to be playing mid to upper 20s at 6,400. If the game's competitive and he finds his way into the starting lineup, he can approach 30, probably playing 25, 26 on average. Just still looks pretty good here, getting 18% ownership. Jamal Murray, 27% ownership, 7,400. I'm getting to 18%. One thing I do want to point out here, and it is similar to what I was just saying about Maxey, but it's going to be a different reason. Jamal Murray, I actually have projected for a couple minutes more, like a minute and a half or so more than Nikola Jokic. And basically the reason is that if this game is competitive down to the wire, you're probably getting like 37 minutes from Joker. You're probably getting 37, 38, whatever from Murray. They're both playing a ton. But Murray is a little bit less blowout prone than Jokic because of their rotations. Generally, what Michael Malone does rotationally is Jokic plays like the entire third quarter, like entire first, entire third, and then he subs back in, halfway or so through the third and through the fourth, where Jamal Murray subs in to start the second and to start the fourth when Jokic comes out. So what that typically means is that at the start of the fourth quarter, let's say you have like a 20, 21, 22 point game, Murray's coming in regardless, and Murray's playing 5-6 minutes into the fourth quarter. And then if it's still a 21, 22, 23 point game, Jokic is probably just not coming back in the game, where Murray is just going to stay in and play down to 4 minutes or something. So it does make Murray a little bit less blowout prone, and it makes him a little bit safer from a minute standpoint in that regard. So that is something to keep in mind here. I do think that it's important when you have somebody $7,400 that plays huge minutes in competitive games on a 5-game slate that does have blowout risk. All of that being true, I think Murray looks really good. Julian Strawther, 3,300, likely to get blowout run if the game does blow out, but also likely to just be involved if it doesn't. He's likely to give you 20 to 22 minutes of just regular playing time. And then if it does blow out, he probably gets a couple minutes there too. So at 3,300, I think he's just a little bit underpriced here, getting 10% ownership, also shooting guard and small forward eligible, which is nice. Michael Porter Jr.'s playing time drops off with everybody healthy, but still certainly somebody capable of getting hot, knocking down some threes. I have him projected for like 30 minutes, so it's not like I'm over projecting based on his playing time earlier in the year or anything like that. 5,900 just looks fine here. I am about half the field on Jokic at 12K. I think this is probably two reasons. It's not one, and it's not like I think it's some super sharp thing. The edge on the slate is probably not fading Nikola Jokic. It's not like I'm going into the slate hoping to do that. But my guess is that why I don't have as much as the field are one, I do again have a relatively low minutes projection on him because of the spread and his rotations. But two, I also know that I have a very healthy projection on Anthony Davis because the matchup for him is just ridiculously good. Not to say it's not good for Jokic, but Davis is also a lot less expensive. So I think how much Davis I'm getting to is probably cutting into Jokic a little bit. But still, if you are getting to Jokic, you want to play Jokic, clearly that's fine. If he does play fewer minutes than normal, there is also a good chance he's having a really big game on a point per minute basis. That's something that you always have to keep in mind too, especially when you're talking about the teams that are favored in games with big spreads. If this game is a blowout to the point that Jokic loses significant minutes, he probably played really well, especially given that the Nuggets will probably give points back with the second unit. Although that's not necessarily true against, it depends who's playing for the Sixers. Like the Sixers second unit might be a G League team. But point being, Jokic could just do really, really well in even limited minutes. Obviously, he's a great play for getting to him. Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, Aaron Gordon, all showing up a little bit for me. Nothing that really stands out. Christian Brown is down to 4,500 with shooting guard and small forward eligibility. His playing time does take a hit with Michael Porter Jr. and Gordon and Peyton Watson's new role or current role where he's closing sometimes. Christian Brown is far from a guaranteed closer. He's competing with Westbrook, Porter, Watson, Gordon for basically 3 spots, but he is still cheap. And if he is playing well, he can play his way into some more minutes. Warren said, do you have time at the end to show Yahoo projections and ownership? I would if I had it. I don't. I haven't played Yahoo in a couple years, so I don't have anything that I've looked at or know for them. But yeah, if I would if I could, but I have nothing that's going to directly translate to Yahoo to say other than anything I'm saying as far as rotations and stuff like that goes. Obviously apply, but pricing being totally different and all of that. I think the scoring is the same as Yahoo. So I can pull up my FanDuel projections. It's not going to help as far as salaries or ownership or anything goes. But I will show the FanDuel projections. Washington taking on the Lakers in LA, another game with blowout risk. Kyle Kuzma, I'm getting to the most here from Washington. Seen him mentioned a couple times in chat. I'm not playing him because he's going into LA, although that certainly doesn't make me like him any less. The thing that I like here about Kuzma is that he's only 6K, and if this game is relatively close, he can actually play a lot more minutes than he's priced to play. Washington is a team that in a weird way actually looks better on a slate like this than they normally do, because they basically are playing in a game that has a spread similar to what they always have and what they're priced for, where a lot of other teams are playing in games with bigger spreads than usual. And so players on those other teams are relatively overpriced compared to Washington. Washington's average spread this year is 11. Last I updated my stuff, the spread in this game was 13.5. So it's not that much bigger of a spread than usual. So it actually makes them relatively look better than they normally do. Normally you're saying, well, you have to project Washington guys a lot lower because they're in this game with a really big spread, and there's 5 games on the slate that have like a 4-point spread. That doesn't exist today. So it makes Washington actually look better relatively. So I'm getting the Kuzma at 18%, Koulibaly at 14%. He's getting 10% ownership, $5,400. I have him for the highest minute projection on the team. He's somebody that can kind of just find his way into a nice chunk of minutes regardless of the score. Obviously not the same point per minute guy as somebody like Kuz or Poole. Sar getting 23% ownership at 5,500, power forward eligible. So that's nice. I think that Sar looks fine. I'm a little below the field, a little bit over the field on Joval at 5K, center only. Obviously, the position for Joval sucks, but keep in mind that you are getting 48 minutes minus garbage time of Alex Sar plus Joval. So they do directly negatively correlate. Every minute that Alex Sar does not play, other than garbage time, is a minute being played by Joval, unless Washington completely blows up their rotation for the first time this year. Washington has not played any small ball this season. So it's one of those two on the floor until you get to garbage time. So I do like just getting to some Joval. From a median projection standpoint, you're looking at like 18 minutes. But every minute that Sar doesn't play, Sar's median is like 27 and a half minutes or so. Every minute that Sar doesn't play because of foul trouble, poor play, whatever it may be, is an extra minute for Joval. And we know that Joval is a monster on a point per minute basis. So I find getting some of that in tournaments. Now, if you do get Andre Drummond starting, and that's announced at some point, I assume I'm just turning any 5K Joval I have into $4,900 Drummond. But they are very similar plays if they're both coming off the bench. Kispert at 3,800, shooting guard, small forward, huge volatility in his playing time. But if he is knocking down threes, he will find more minutes. And that is always nice when you have somebody 3,800 that can just play more if they're playing well. Carrington, 18% ownership at 4,200. I get it. He's cheap. He's starting. He's probably playing, 28 to 30 minutes. Not somebody that I feel the need to get a lot of if he's popular, but there's nothing really wrong with him. I'm getting some Keyshawn George at 3,700. Similar thinking as Kispert. I'm not getting to any Jordan Poole, which seems weird, and I wish that I was, because obviously he is one of like 2 guys on this team that can really contribute from a scoring standpoint. So a little surprised that I'm not getting there. I would not be upset at all if I was getting more. I am happy though that at least I'm getting to Kuzma. I would definitely want to be getting to, one of those guys a decent amount. And then also knowing that I am getting to Anthony Davis a lot. I assume I'm getting to LeBron a good amount too. Having one of these guys as a run back isn't a requirement, but it certainly doesn't hurt. And then wrapping things up with the Lakers. As I mentioned, I am basically 2x the field on Anthony Davis. Center only on DraftKings, but 10-3 is a good price tag, 54% ownership. Have him with the second best play type matchup or play type bump behind Karl Anthony Towns. And I guess Towns is another reason that I'm not getting a lot of Jokic. So I'm just going a little bit cheaper at center, still getting to the really high upside guys with Davis and Jokic. I think that approach is really strong, even though clearly I love Jokic. LeBron, I'm a little over the field on him as well at 9,800. Only 2 of my LeBron lineups have Davis. I think you can play them together. Obviously, if they both have really big games, it's pretty unlikely that the game that Washington is hanging in there. Or if they both have big games, you're probably getting a really big game from either Kuzma or Jordan Poole. So both lineups that I have with James and Davis right now have Bub Carrington. One has Joval, one has George. Neither one has Kuzma or Poole, which kind of sucks, but at least I do have some semblance of Washington in those lineups. I would want to at that point. LeBron obviously looks good. Davis and LeBron, not a lot to say there. Max Christie, 4,300, shooting guard, small forward. Have him in for about 30 minutes. Not an exciting player, but he is in a really good spot against Washington. He is cheap. He can fit positionally in pretty much any type of lineup that you are looking to play. Chris Boucher was just ruled out. We already talked about the implications of that. Rui facing his former team at 5K. I'm pretty close to the field at 5%. Reeves is fine. Finney Smith is fine. Nothing really interesting beyond those guys for the Lakers, but Anthony Davis and LeBron do look like big priorities for me. I will pull up my FanDuel projections now, like I'd said, just to kind of scroll through those quickly. But, obviously it's going to be pretty close to DraftKings. You just have the difference, slight differences in scoring there. Yeah, so Jokic, still at the top. Anthony Davis right behind him with power forward eligibility, at least on FanDuel. I don't know about Yahoo. Then you get a drop to LeBron and Towns, then a bigger drop to that like Maxey, Banchero, Barnes, Brunson, George tier. So, yeah, that's FanDuel scoring, which would be the same as Yahoo. Positions and salaries obviously are different. Getting back to this screen, DC24 said, in large field on DK, would you play Kuzma over Wendell Carter? So I never think about it that way. I have a lot of, I'm a little bit over the field on Kuzma. I am over the field on Carter. I think they're both really good plays. I generally don't think in terms of 1v1 pivots on like a large scale. In an individual lineup, basically what you're going to be thinking about is like if you're looking at your lineup and you have, what are there, 8 roster spots on DraftKings, you have 7 guys that are popular, and then you can play either Carter or Kuzma in the last spot. Carter's at 28% ownership, Kuzma's at 13. They project similarly. Carter projects better, but 33 for Carter, 31 for Kuzma. It's basically the same thing. Then yeah, maybe you play. It's perfectly fine to play Kuzma over Carter. In that lineup, you're saving ownership. You're not giving up too much in the way of projection. I'm not just going into the slate saying like, I'm just playing Kyle Kuzma in every lineup where I would play Wendell Carter, because there's going to be plenty of lineups where I have 1 or 2 low-owned guys, and then I want Wendell Carter because I do project him higher than Kyle Kuzma. I think he's slightly more likely to succeed than Kuzma, even though they are very close. So it really just depends what the rest of your lineup looks like. Also, from a correlation standpoint, like if you're looking at your lineup, you have 7 guys, you have a lineup you really like. It has 7 guys. It has Anthony Davis. It has Max Christie, and it doesn't have anybody from the Wizards. Then yeah, put in Kyle Kuzma, because if Anthony Davis has a big game while also playing all of his normal minutes, so it's competitive, there's a really good chance. Like if it's guaranteed Anthony Davis plays 36 minutes and has 65 DraftKings points, Kyle Kuzma's projection at that point would be like 35, because instead of being projected for 28 minutes, he'd be projected for 32. So, use correlation, use ownership when you're looking at any individual lineup for that like 1v1 decision. But overall, there's just so much flexibility and so many different approaches and good lineups you can make that it's never something I'm really thinking about in terms of like a 1v1, if that makes sense. So that's all I have for you on this one. 5-game slate, a lot of news in these late games that we are waiting on, specifically, I guess, Philly. So yeah, I shouldn't say a lot of news. We're just waiting on a lot of news from Philly. Good luck on your lineups tonight. Again, you can get access to my projections using the link in the description below. Thanks for checking out the show. Don't forget the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, all that. And I'll be back here again tomorrow. Actually, probably won't be tomorrow. Endgame Syndicate Roundtable. We're recording that at 1, so I probably won't have time for this. I will be back for sure on Thursday. But subscribe to the channel so you find out if I am doing the show tomorrow. Anyway, thanks for checking it out. Good luck on your lineups tonight.